Hi everyone, I'm not sure if anyone can hear me yet, but I hope you're all filing in. Welcome to our session today, our first 10 o'clock session for the electricity storage marketplace. Hope that's all where you're supposed to be. Please do stick around, if not, it's going to be great. But I'll wait for you all to sort of file in. If one of my producers could just give me a bit of a heads up when we've got a good enough number of people in the room. I can't quite see how many of you are joining, so I could just be broadcasting myself, so that would be great fun. But please do, as you're joining, just say hi, put your name in the chat, say hello, say where you're joining from. Feel free to just introduce yourselves, familiarise yourself with the platform. If you're on Hoover, have a look around, see what else is going on the platform. If you're on Zoom, it's absolutely fine. We'll go through a bit of tech in a minute anyway, but we'll let you all get yourselves sorted before we make a start. One thing I did last year was trying to get people to do their favourite storage joke. So if you feel like you've got a really good joke about storage, because there are loads, obviously, hot topic for jokes, then feel free to stick that in the chat. Prize for the best storage joke. I had the best storage joke last year, so you've got quite a lot to top. I've forgotten it, so obviously it was great, but yeah. If not, feel free to just say who you are and where you're from. It's absolutely fine. Hi Claire, nice to see you. Okay, we'll just give it another minute or so and just make sure everyone's on and ready, and then I will make a start. It is 10 o'clock on a Wednesday morning, so I appreciate that people are probably just waking up and getting started. Okay, I think we're still ticking up a bit, but I will make a start because I've got lots of introductory bits to get through. So hopefully people are joining after, you won't be missing too much, just me waffling on about tech and Hoover and all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I'll make a start. So welcome to everyone. This is the Electricity Storage Network annual marketplace. If that's not where you're expecting to be, then why not stick around and learn about storage for the next hour and a half. So welcome to all of our members. I can see quite a few of our members on the chat who are joining, so great to see you all. Thanks for joining, and welcome to our non-members as well. So anyone that's not been familiar with the ESN, or you haven't been a part of our group before, or you're joining from outside of the UK, then great, welcome, good to see you. Over the next couple of days, you'll get an opportunity to learn a lot about storage and about the storage industry in the UK and what we're doing. So it's a really good opportunity to kind of learn a bit more about the storage industry and where we see us going in the next few years. So welcome to everyone. I'm Madeline Greenhalgh. I'm the Policy and Advocacy Manager for Regen, which manages the Electricity Storage Network, and I run the Electricity Storage Network as well. So if you haven't heard of us before, we're the UK network for electricity storage. We've got a pretty diverse membership, increasing actually in the last few years, kind of reflecting the growth in the storage industry, so that's quite positive. We have a broad remit to help decarbonise, support the decarbonisation of the energy industry, and we do that through creating an environment in which storage can really flourish. So that's the policy environment, the regulatory environment, and the market environment. So really improving all those environments so that storage can really flourish and succeed and support that transition to zero carbon energy. So like I say, we're managed by Regen. So Regen is a not-for-profit with another broad mission to decarbonise the energy system, but doing that across the whole system. So storage kind of sits neatly in the middle of that with the electricity storage network. So that's all about us. This is our annual marketplace. We run this every year. It's been running for way over 10 years now. I can't take credit for the ones 10 years ago, but we've been here for the last couple of years at Regen running these. So it's really like a good feature in the storage calendar these days. And this year we've got 2 days of content for you. We've got 6 sessions over the next 2 days. We're going to be covering, looking out to 2030. We're going to be looking at that surge and transmission connections for storage and what that means for the system. We're going to be looking at things like fire safety. What else are we looking at? Long duration storage, tons of different topics we're covering. And that's just the sessions that we'll be doing live. We also have quite a lot of on-demand content as well. So podcasts, documents, educational videos. So please do check out the platform because there's tons of stuff to explore. So yeah, we're online again this year. So many of you will remember from last year joining us. that this is the same platform. It is a free event as well, so we've put this on for free. We like to make our content as open as possible, and it was really great to see so many of you able to access it last year. So we've done the same again this year, but that wouldn't be possible without our sponsors. Cost of it to put on an event like this. So thanks to Fluence, to Schneider, to Modo, and to Freeth for supporting the event in various different ways. And Freeth, actually, we're going to host an in-person drinks reception because we really wanted to see you all face to face. It's been 2 years, and I'm sure you've had more than enough of me head and shoulders on the screen. We really want to see you face to face with a drink and say hi. But unfortunately, we did get a bit scared off by Omicron, so we've had to. We've postponed that. We are going to do it in April, so Freeths are going to host that in April at their London offices. So thanks very much to them, and we'll get an invite and we'll hopefully see you all in person in April. In the meantime, you're stuck with me on your screens, so apologies for that. There will be other people joining me, so don't worry, you're not stuck with me for an hour and a half waffling on. But before I bring them in, just a little bit of housekeeping. You can see from the slide on the screen, there's just a little bit of information about the platforms we're using today. If you're on Hoover or Zoom, either is fine for this session. You can access the same functionality on both for the session itself. If you are on Hoover, like I said, do check out that content surrounding the event. So there's lots you can chat to your other delegates individually if you want to. You can go on our community forums, look at job postings, look at all that additional content we've got on there as well. So there's plenty to do. So if you are joining on Zoom, you're absolutely fine for this session, but if you want to check out that additional content, I would recommend you head over to Hoover at some point in the next couple of days. Just a bit about the Q&A, where we will be taking Q&A if possible today. So either on Zoom or Hoover, type it in the Q&A and we'll get that, and I'll hopefully come to some of your questions. Keep the chat maybe for chatting and talking, reflecting on the session, talking to each other, introducing yourselves, and the Q&A, try and put your questions in the Q&A so we can get as many of them as possible. I can't take things by the raise hand function, unfortunately. It's just logistically a bit difficult with so many people on the call. But yeah, please do stick them in the Q&A box and we'll try and get to them. So that's enough of my waffle about all the tech stuff today. We'll make a start on our actual session today. So what are we going to do? This is our first session of the 2 days. So we wanted to really reflect a bit on the storage industry in general, looking out to 2030. We've got a number of speakers you can see on your screen there that are going to be joining us, leaders in our sector, to look out to 2030 and see what's going on. So I think it's safe to say that storage is fast becoming an established industry. We know that its role in achieving net zero is absolutely crucial, and I think it's safe to say that's almost universally recognised now within the energy industry for sure, and also without mostly as well. So that's really great progress. And the next few years are really going to see us going from that exciting up and coming newcomer, disrupting markets a little bit, to a hopefully still exciting stalwart of the energy industry and the zero carbon transition, if you can have an exciting stalwart, I'm not sure. But that's going to be like quite a big shift, I think, for the industry. We're going to be moving to established business models. We're going to have to scale to meet that demand and really shift and be agile to change to the needs of that changing renewable energy system. The last 10 years have been very, we've seen so much change in the last 10 years. The next 10 years are going to be even more so. We're not sure how a fully renewable system is going to play out exactly. So storage is going to have to be really agile to try and adapt to those shifts as we need to. So, like I said, I'm joined by several amazing colleagues today in the storage sector to discuss what that next decade will look like. We're going to be looking out to about 2030, which you might pick up as 8 years away, but in my head it's still 2020, and I'm sure for many of you it is. So we're the decade or so, we're looking over the next 10 years with that sort of 2030 mark. And we're going to be trying to get to the bottom of how storage can fulfil the ambitions of flexibility, of decarbonisation. There's quite high ambitions that we have. We're going to be looking at sort of role that storage can play in the system, what kind of high-level decisions we need from decision makers, what sort of challenges we might see in the coming decade as well. And you never know, we might get some jokes from Cathy McCoy along the way, but we'll see. So yeah, Cathy is one of our speakers. So I'll stop talking now and bring in our speakers. So thanks to our speakers for joining us today. I'll let them introduce themselves properly, but we do have Cathy McCoy from Sembcorp. We've got Irena Di Martino from AmpX, and we've got Hannah Clapham from the Department for Business, Energy and Industrial Strategy, henceforth in this session known as BASE, because I can't be bothered to say it every time. So I'll bring you all in, and if you just wanted to introduce yourselves, but we'll start with the first question. So I've kept going on about how we're going to look forwards, but actually I think for the first question, maybe we could look backwards a little bit, just to sort of see if there's anything we can learn. So if you want to just come on and introduce yourselves and say, what is the most sort of significant pivotal moment you've seen for storage in the last year or so that you think we could learn from in the next decade? Kathy, I can see you on my screen, so I'll come to you first.
Hi everyone, I'm Kathy McClay. I'm Director of Trading and Optimization for Simcor Energy in the UK, and we have currently 70 megawatts of batteries all in the distribution network that we own and optimize ourselves. 50 more coming online soon, and we've announced we're going to build another 360 megawatts. And before I was at Simcor, I was head of commercial and head of future markets at National Grid. And one of my real jobs was trying to open up all of the markets to demand side and batteries. So that's kind of my background. So I think there's two real things that have been very important from batteries. And I'm going to say this because I was involved in both of them, although when I took over, I want to go back a bit further than just the last year. I think the real thing that promoted batteries in the UK was the system operator introducing the enhanced frequency response service. Mm-hmm. And actually saying we are going to sign a 4-year contract for that. That project kicked off before I joined, but I actually was the one who got to sign those contracts, and those batteries are just finishing now. But the reason I say that was so important was within 6 months to a year, we had batteries that always said they couldn't take part in FFR coming into the market and getting contracts and getting pretty short-term contracts. So I think that was a really big one. And then I think another big step change was the introduction of the new services, starting with dynamic containment, and the fact that the system operator kept the price flat for the first year gave people a lot of confidence, and we saw a lot of battery growth on the back of that as well. So those would be. So I cheated. I went back too far, and I also gave you 2 rather than 1. But hey, I never actually managed to follow rules, so apologies.
Starting the session as you mean to go on, Kathy.
Yeah.
I would expect nothing less. It's fine. Yeah, well, that's interesting. That's really good. I think good that you focused on markets there. Not surprising. They've been really influential for storage. I definitely agree on the EFR, and particularly on the DC point as well more recently. Dynamic containment. I should try and start afresh and not do too many acronyms. But thanks, Kathy. Hannah, do you want to go next?
Yeah, thank you. So hi everyone. My name's Hannah Clapham, and as Madeline said, I work in BASE, and specifically I work in our smart energy team. So the team that's responsible for the smart systems and flexibility plan, a new version of which was published last year, which we were really, really excited about. And specifically, I head up our electricity storage team. So I'm kind of responsible for the actions in the storage chapter of that plan, and have been in the team for coming up 4 years now, which has been so awesome to learn about this really, really exciting industry and just really see it grow over the past 4 years. I think in terms of your question, very hard to pick one moment. So I'm not sure I'm going to do a good job of that. But I think what I've seen over the kind of past couple of years, and something that's been really noticeable in the past year or so, is kind of the storage industry. It feels like it's reaching a kind of tipping point whereby, as you say, the importance and kind of criticality of it is very well recognized. We're seeing or hearing and seeing about investment into kind of different types of storage, battery storage in particular. Investment seems to kind of, in the news, I see new investment happening every day, which is really, really awesome. So it does feel like we've kind of reached that tipping point. I think kind of particular things that have been really interesting have, the impact of the pandemic in 2020, kind of giving us that slight insight into what managing a low carbon system might look like. And I think technologies such as storage have kind of been able to maximize those opportunities, which has been really great. And I think kind of from our point of view, we feel like we're reaching a point whereby we're seeing the impact of some of the changes that we've kind of worked really, really closely with Ofgem and industry on, in terms of the regulatory framework being clearer, kind of to ensure that that investment can come in and be certain about how these technologies are going to be treated. We have seen huge market reform. Obviously, there's a way to go still, and we absolutely recognise that and want to continue to work with industry, Ofgem, ESO, to deliver all of that. But I do think we've seen kind of reform, as Kathy talked about, which has really enabled storage to kind of find its place within the market, business models starting to establish themselves a bit more. And I think it's just kind of reflected in the pipeline that we see. Like, that is just growing every time I check the kind of planning pipeline. It seems to be going up by another couple of gigawatts, which is really awesome to see. So yeah, I'll probably stop there before I kind of go on any further.
I think you've cheated, Hannah. You did all the things.
I know.
No, that's good. No, definitely. I agree on many of those points. And hopefully we'll come back to some of those. I've jotted some of those down. So I think you made some really interesting things we can come back to. So Irina, if you wanted to pick up, if there's anything else you can think of.
Pretty much. Well, first, let me just reintroduce myself. So Irene Di Martino, I lead AMPEX, which is a fully owned subsidiary of AMP Solar Group. So we've been up and running for about 2 years, developing a digital energy platform that is very much catering for storage amongst other technologies in order to unlock flexibility at scale. Flexibility, I guess, is going to be the key word today, together with storage. And before that, I was at Tangi, where I spent most of my career in the operations department, looking at global generation, mainly from fossil fuel power plants. So I guess all of the things that my two colleagues have mentioned. So in a way, I was going to highlight what Kathy said at the start. I think one of the biggest pivotal moments of the last year or so has been the introduction of dynamic containment by the ESO. I mean, clearly that is a strong signal in the direction of supporting energy storage and encouraging more investment. And as Anna said, you just need to read almost daily. The pipeline keeps growing, and the pace at which REST is coming along is definitely outpaced, actually much greater than the one that we're seeing in terms of unlocking network constraints, which then poses the greater challenges for operators and the ESO. And how do we address that gap that I'm sure we'll come back on later this morning. But I also wanted to say, very timely, out of just pure coincidence, this ESN forum happens this morning, a day after a big announcement by AMP Solar Group on the construction of 2 for battery storage assets, the largest in Europe, located in Scotland, for a total of 800 megawatts. It was announced literally yesterday, and that's, of course, I feel very proud of being a part of this journey with AMP, because AMPEX will be the digital energy platform that will optimally dispatch those assets. But even if we look at the fact in its own right that there is such large storage asset now coming into the market, it supports also the need for long-term storage, for larger storage, addressing the issues of intermittency, the issues of capacity constraints that, again, are where the market, reforms are trying to aim to look at constraints and how we resolve those, and how technology together with market design are going to be together in synergy, trying to resolve challenges. So I think it's a number of many things, and everything that my colleagues have just stated in line with what I think is really been making a difference for the storage technology and the market around storage itself.
Great, thanks, Irina. And that's a fantastic to hear about your project, 800 megawatts, huge. Yeah, definitely, we'll come back to that point about the size of projects and long duration storage as well. It'll be a really interesting point to touch back on. So someone remind me if I do forget to come back to that. But Hannah, you mentioned the pipeline of and how you're seeing it growing all the time. I thought it would be worth just reeling off a few figures about what we have right now and what we have in the pipeline and what we might see in the future. So we've got about 3.8 gigawatts on the system right now. We have about 29 gigawatts in the pipeline, according to Regen's analysis on this. My colleague Ray is actually doing a podcast, which should be released tomorrow, which talks through the numbers in that storage pipeline, so it might be worth tuning into if that's of interest to you. But we think about 29 gigawatts in the pipeline, which is huge. especially when you consider the predictions for what we might have. So BEIS are estimating about 9 to 10 gigawatts, I think, by 2030. National Grid, ESO, their future energy scenarios are about 8 to 18 gigawatts by 2030. It's quite a big range there. And the Committee on Climate Change suggests about 18 gigawatts by 2035. So we're looking quite a big range, 8 to 18 gigawatts really there in that range. So quite a big shift to get there from 2030 perhaps. And Kathy, do those numbers feel right to you? Do you recognise that? Does that feel like we're heading in the right direction?
I certainly recognise the numbers because I'm currently finishing off our investment case for final investment in our storage. And I think I managed to have the largest projected battery storage for about 4 weeks before I've now been trumped already with the 800 megawatt one. I think it's important with looking at two things. If you look at the FES scenarios, they're not trying to project the number of batteries that are going to be built. Each scenario is self-consistent, and it's really saying, this is what we think we need to be able to manage the system in these circumstances. So it more gives you what might we need in the future, which is very important for investment decisions. I think people forget how much storage is actually on the system already because there's all the pump storage. And my first job was at First Hydro, doing the Norwegian Vestiniag. So that was my first love. So the key thing for me is the pipeline and 29 gigawatts and how much of that is actually real and how much is going to get there. And what are the blockers? And we see two major blockers at the minute. One is actually just getting a connection agreement. And that can be quite difficult. Actually, can I be like the Spanish Inquisition and say, actually, we see three blockers. So there's the connection agreement. Also, if you look at connecting in the distribution networks now, we're being told, do you know what, we don't want you doing dynamic containment because you're too quick. And then if you look what's been changing in the market over the last sort of 4 or 5 months, batteries are moving more and more merchant again. You know, we had the DC at £17 a megawatt daily. You need really good optimization skills to take part in this market. It's really a 4-hour market. It's going to go down. Getting that investment, especially if you have to go for project finance. I'm wondering with some of the uncertainties in the market right now, if that might slow things down a bit as well. We're lucky we can finance everything in-house because we've got a big parent company in Singapore, but that's just another consideration as well. So I think there is going to be strong growth. And when I've looked, there needs to be strong growth, but I don't believe that 29 gigawatts is all going to come to market if you look at it. So we're looking at every day. So
yeah, I think that 29 gigawatts is an interesting figure. Again, my colleague Ray has actually looked into what sort of how realistic some of those figures are. I think if we did have 29 gigawatts that came through, I think we might have to consider how we would manage that because that's quite a lot. So yeah, that's a really good point, Kathy, that connection agreement. Again, we can come back to that perhaps. I know that is an issue that many people have been talking about. Irena, do you agree? Do you think we're 29 gigawatts, do you think we're on track to meet that, or those are the targets that BEIS and others have put in?
Look, I think I'm going to have to be careful not to state very much what Kathy says before me every time, because I very much agree with everything she said. I think that there is a cause for optimism if we think that just 2021 was the best year when it comes to storage. And I think what she just said about her managing the largest portfolio until I came in this morning to do the Trump announcement with 800, those are just indicators in the right direction. I think that the problem is exactly what she's saying, is the blockers that are between the 8 and the 29. So even if we were to assume for a moment that 29 is currently realistic on the basis of the impulse that we're seeing, I think we need to be very mindful of two things in my view. One is access to data, visibility of data when it comes to capacity and forecasting that capacity, because that essentially is one of the key inputs that investors need in order to then make decisions. And then policy and regulatory framework. Now, the ambition of the regulator is to have the best policy framework in place by the mid-2020s. But what we have seen to date is interventions which are very small incremental ones in a very complex set of regulatory framework, which was devised for an energy system that is completely different than the one we have today, fully decentralized. So we need to look at ways that really address large storage, they also address long duration technologies alongside storage, and that truly make sure that storage can compete with generation other sources that have been around for much longer. And so I do see the regulatory framework is as important as data, but clearly I'm a big champion of the digitalization part of things. And I think Laura Sanders has been doing a great job, and she launched the latest reports about a week or so ago. And I think we don't speak enough about how we actually are going to make use of data. How is that data going to inform investment decisions? And how do we make sure that also visibility of local constraints, and I'm sure we'll come on to talk about pricing and granularity of pricing. So maybe I'm like Kathy, 2/3 blockers, granularity on signals and ability to understand what constraints truly, what value do they carry when it comes to investment, visibility of data, and regulatory framework that truly is fit for the energy system of the future. It currently isn't, not yet.
Yeah. Yeah, definitely agree. That point about data, let's definitely come back to that, because I think, yeah, you're speaking from a really good position at Ampex of how important data is. I come from a data background myself, so I've come to the energy industry being slightly frustrated at what the data digitalization landscape is like. So let's come back to that in a minute, Irina. Hannah, hopefully that was all quite useful to you, I guess, as sitting in Bays. Yeah, I suppose I won't ask you to comment, I guess, too much on some of the numbers, but do you think we might see any sort of significant shifts that might change those numbers? Is there anything you think we should be anticipating coming up that might change that our need for 29 gigawatts or 18 gigawatts or whatever it might be?
Yeah, so I think it's a really interesting question. I guess my first point would be, I think we all recognize and kind of appreciate the uncertainty in the exact pathway that we're going to take in meeting net zero. And I think we need to build a framework that is adaptable and can respond to the shifts and shocks. And we can't predict exactly what they're going to be, because everything is changing so quickly. New technologies are going to come forward. Business models have already evolved significantly, and I'm sure will continue to do so over the next decade or so. At a smaller level, kind of understanding how consumers are going to interact with all these measures as well. How much are they going to respond to DSR? They could, have a essential role to play, but we can't anticipate exactly how they're going to respond and exactly how they're going to uptake these technologies. So I think we need to be aware of all of that. I guess what we do know, and it's kind of shown in the figures, is that we need a lot of flexibility on the system, no matter what. It's critical to integrating all of the kind of the demand that we might see coming onto the system, definitely integrating all of the renewables that we're expecting to see over the next few years. And I think what our analysis showed that we published alongside the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan was that flexibility, as well as doing all of those things being critical for energy security, it also really increases our optionality for how we meet net zero. Kind of it enables us to have different deployment levels and different options in terms of kind of technology mix on the system. And so that's a really, really critical thing that we need to enable, because we want that flexibility to have different technology mixes. We don't know exactly what's going to happen in the future. I guess our approach has always been very adaptive, and I guess on Irina's point about kind of smaller changes to the system, I think we need to work within the current market framework, but also be very mindful of what's going to happen in the future. And we want to keep up the momentum of helping to facilitate flexibility right now, but also being mindful of kind of any bigger changes that might be needed down the line. And I think that's that was kind of the key message that we wanted to get across in the recent Smart Plan, was that we need to keep the momentum right now, because like you say, we don't know exactly what's going to happen over the next few years. We don't know what shocks are going to come onto the system. So doing what we can within the current framework, whilst being mindful of what might be needed in the future, and constantly engaging with industry, understanding how things are going, has been our approach. And that's why you might kind of think about smaller changes, but we think that's been absolutely critical. If you just kind of sit there and only think about bigger changes 10 years down the line, you might miss opportunities kind of on the current system.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Hannah. I think that not only does storage have to provide flexibility, but it has to be flexible. We have to be quite agile as an industry, and not just storage, but other types of flexibility. Have to be quite, from what you're saying, it sounds like I have to be pretty agile to respond to whatever happens, because we're not sure. They could change. So we've got these numbers and these targets and everything, or estimates going ahead. But yeah, we are going to need to be pretty agile as an industry and flexible in ourselves to adapt to that. I think you're right, Hannah, that we're not sure what that's going to look like. I know the ESO are doing as much as possible to try and model and look ahead to what that picture will be in 2030, 2035, and how we'll need to shift. But we don't really know what a fully renewable system how it will run and what exactly it will look like. But a lot of people were saying that in 2020, when we had obviously the very low demand through COVID and lockdown, and very high renewable generation, that we saw a little bit of a snapshot perhaps of what it might look like to balance a very high renewable system. Lots of different opinions on that, I think, but it's interesting to see. Perhaps that could tell us something. So what do you think that has told us about where storage will play a role in the future in that highly renewable system? We talked about how much we might need and where it might sit, and what the size of projects perhaps, but what sort of role will it play? What kind of challenges will it need to be addressing? Irene, I'll come back to you for that, if that's okay. What sort of challenges will storage need to address, and what kind of role will it play in the next 10 years?
I think what you've just mentioned, especially going back to the days of negative pricing during lockdown, and what that actually taught us or made us think more about, is the role of flexibility also behind the meter, something that we're very focused on in AMPEX, something that other players have started to speak more about. We're part of the ADE, and some of the stats that have been coming through in the last year or so about the unlock level of flexibility behind the meter across Europe. There is currently estimated 200 gigawatts of installed assets behind the meter. Clearly, that's any asset, not necessarily assets that can participate into flex. But if we think about 20 gigawatts approximately of potentially unlockable flex capacity, only 10% is currently being used at most. So that just tells you how much, especially when you think of the challenges that long-term front-of-the-meter storage poses, and we need to overcome. Even though we've got large batteries now coming onto the market, then we do need to find a way to being able to rely on that behind-the-meter flexibility, but doing so without having to rely on human behavior to be repeatable, to be prompt to act when there is, a sunny day on a Sunday afternoon, and you want that negative price to be harnessed by as many behind-the-meter consumption nodes as possible. So you need technology to do that job, and this is what AMPEX has been focusing on, amongst other things, is the development of digital energy assistant to be very user-centric, a technology that absolutely allows to address the needs of the grid in real time, but also the preferences of users. Otherwise, you're never going to get that level of delegated authority, so to speak, by users to get the technology to do their job in accordance with real-time price signals. So I think that was one of the biggest, to me, as pointers that came through in the last year, especially during pandemic. But I guess what also that confirmed is, yes, the system can run on renewable energy. The storage will play a massive role, and as we've been saying with Kathy at the beginning, the fact that it can be so quickly responsive to capacity constraints, to generation constraints, dynamic containment has proven less than a second responsive time. So again, storage can do that. Is how sustainable that is in the long run with the numbers that we've been talking about, up to 29 gigawatts. The ESO mantra is that we need to rely on a diverse set of technologies. So that opens up another debate. How is compressed air going to play? Because there's no degradation involved. Is that the answer alongside battery storage? If so, how scalable? And then there is the other big key point of discussion across anyone in the sector around hydrogen. How is hydrogen going to play? Is that truly going to be another disruptor that absolutely takes the strain off the storage, especially when wind is intermittent with what, the sort of targets would go 40 gigawatts of wind by 2030 is clearly not insignificant. So yes, those are my thinking points from what you pointed to, especially looking back at the last year or year and a half through pandemic.
Yeah, absolutely. Kathy, what do you think about that 2020 point? Do you think there's anything we could be learning from that? Do you see what role storage will play? Have you learned from that, especially
So if you look at a system with high renewables, I think there's three broad areas that are difficult to manage. One is frequency management. A second is intermittency. And the third is system stability, which is when my geeky electrical engineer goes out. So if you take frequency management, we're seeing that as an issue in the system right now, even since the COVID times. And that's where these faster services come in, like dynamic containment, etc. And batteries can play a role in that. Now, interestingly, pump storage is too slow, but pump storage can provide other services instead. Now, I'll come to system stability second. That's like managing your short circuit level, your inertia, your reactive, that kind of stuff. That's where things like the Pathfinder projects that Grid are doing. Now, a lot of those services can be provided by ordinary synchronous compensators, which are just like big electrical machines that are spinning without putting any megawatts out to the system and can provide the same services we've also got. Interestingly, and of course, pump storage can do that. And one of the Scottish pump storage is already providing inertia services. Batteries can also do it, but you need a very special kind of battery. So that's another area, but it's never, if you look at the business case for it, you never just do that with the battery, but a battery can provide things like dynamic containment whilst also providing short circuit level and reactive. So you can start getting the stacking. The area that's really interesting for me and is beginning to worry me more going forward is the intermittency. Because as well as the batteries I have very fast gas engines as well. And you saw things like last September where we had wind down for quite a while, etc. Batteries can manage 1 or 2 hours of the day for that. Pump storage can do longer. But what's actually going to manage that intermittency? And as we bring it, like even just Monday, where wind was down at 1 gigawatt and the peak is more than an hour long, what do you do? And that's where, Irena, we're thinking of similar things because I'm technology agnostic. I'm looking at, we're looking at carbon capture up on our Wilton site, and can that provide some of the flexibility that's not storage? But we're also thinking, what about hydrogen? Do we create the hydrogen when there's lots of renewables and then run it to use a gas turbine? But I think that intermittency problem and where you need longer storage, but even, I'm not sure pump storage also sorts it out properly in terms of the duration. So that's the one I'm mulling over, and I don't know what the answer is yet, but it's going to be a broad range of technologies, I think.
Yeah, I think it's really definitely the point that people want to solve, right? That variability of renewables question. You named a couple of three different options, really. We've got storage, we've got CCS, we've got hydrogen. I mean, personally, I would say that two of those are less likely than the other. I think storage is proven to be, as we've been saying, it's a established industry. I think hydrogen, CCS, for me, have quite a lot of question marks. So I guess, but we need something, and it's got to be zero carbon. So I guess but
they solve different problems, Hannah, Madeline. They solve different problems. Batteries cannot solve the intermittency problem. That's the problem. Pump storage might, and I keep asking my boss for a pump storage station for Christmas, but they're really, really expensive, and they take a long time to build. So capital costs are too high for me.
Yeah. Well, okay. Well, that brings on maybe to that point about different lengths of storage duration that we I have started to talk about a lot more. And Hannah, I was really pleased to see we engaged well with your call for evidence that you had last year, and we've seen BEIS put through the funding for a lot of innovation projects around long duration. So do you have a feel for that, of where, you know, as Kathy rightly says, there's still that question of duration there that storage isn't really able to solve at this point? Where do you see longer duration storage coming in there, and what sort of technologies do you see might be able to solve that problem?
Yeah, so definitely a question at the forefront of our minds, my mind in particular, given that we've just done a call for evidence on this topic in particular. So the call for evidence was kind of focusing on what are barriers to long duration storage, what is happening in the market right now that might help bring forward some of these technologies, and then kind of what's the gap, what else might be needed to achieve that. And that was really great. We had really, really good engagement from industry on that. Lots of detail, lots of responses to work through, which has been really awesome. Alongside that, and I think a really important piece of work that we've also done and in the process of kind of finalising at the moment, is a piece of analysis on the system need for long duration storage. So that was a bit of a gap in our analysis that we published alongside the Smart Systems and Flexibility Plan, but it didn't model long duration storage. So we've gone out and kind of done that as a separate piece. And we'll obviously hope to share the results with industry kind of at some point in the near future. But that is really important for us, kind of understanding, you know, what durations might be needed on the system at different points in time, what other technologies kind of might provide this, how do all of these technologies work together in the system, kind of optimize together. So I don't have any answers for you right now, but it's definitely something that we're thinking really kind of actively about and trying to kind of get to the bottom of. And eventually we are looking to publish our government response, and we'll definitely be referring to this piece of analysis in that government response. So yeah, very, very good question. I guess the only other thing I wanted to reflect on is the kind of signals piece for long duration storage as well. So there's the kind of the system need, and I think what's really important is to understand that at what point that system need kind of comes into place. So I guess right now on the system, you don't have signals that are there for that really, really long duration, hence the kind of these technologies aren't necessarily coming forward. However, I do think we're starting to see a shift. I mean, my understanding and kind of looking at battery storage development, we're now, you know, it seems more typical to have 2-hour batteries. I recognise that's not kind of long duration at all, but coming from a place when they started off as half an hour kind of batteries a few years ago, 2 hours, and, you know, industry are telling me that, you know, not in the too distant future, you'd be looking at 4-hour batteries. And I think that starts to show the shift that you're getting in terms of hopefully the signals that will come forward. But yeah, absolutely recognise the point that, you know, we're going to need different technologies to solve different problems, and intermittency is a big one that we need to look at in detail.
Can I just add, sorry, Maddie, Anna, to what Anna just said? I think, as you've just said, Anna, it's important to basically, through the constraint pathfinder, as well as, you know, the BEIS studies, for us to really identify where, from a geographical standpoint, capacity constraints are, because that will then inform what type of technologies can truly fill that gap. So I think I absolutely welcome the attention and the debate on geographical diversity and localization of constraints, because that, to me, is as important as getting granularity on signals, discussing whether, you know, price signals to be zonal, nodal, again, how that will be reflected into the level of investment that we can see coming on the market, and also how truly the constraints can be addressed in real time. So I think that there are all, you know, we're all thinking in the right directions, and efforts are going in the right directions. But it's time for that data piece to absolutely, you know, be dominant in all frameworks and the way we address challenges, because I know that behind the meter flexibility, or even front of the meter, large and small storage is not going to be the panacea to all challenges in one go just overnight. But I think that having better visibility of capacity and having data asset visibility that Laura Sanders so much speaks about, having asset register, knowing where assets are located, being able to have a seamless, even from very small players, a seamless process of registering assets in the system. I mean, we've seen with power responsive, big change in opening up to smaller players, participating into markets, but we need to then now think as we move 2030 and beyond. And I do see, and I think that many more are starting to see and speak of the feasibility of transactive grid. I mean, getting to full transactivity is ultimately the driver to us getting that level of localization, both from a price signal standpoint, network constraint standpoint, capacity that can play at that level, and how do the smaller stakeholders at very individual level, residential household, commercial premise, behind and in front of the meter, are truly going to be able to leverage that level of, the decentralization in a positive manner. We do need data. We need access to data to optimize demand side management, but also to enable the level of investment that is required in specific areas rather than others to a certain extent.
Yeah, completely agree. And it just to come back to your point about signals there, I think you're totally right. We can't do that without data. We need that, but we also need to know where those signals are coming from. And there's a lot of talk at the moment, as you mentioned, Irene, about geography, about location, and how we signal that within the market. Do you have any thoughts on kind of where that location signal you think should sit, where it might come from within the market, or from elsewhere, in fact?
I think I'm following very much, and I think Kathy I'm interested in Kathy actually contributing to this bit on the debate between zonal and nodal. How granular are we going to go? How is the ESO going to address the need for us to, move away from where we currently are and, encourage that level of local flexibility provision? I think that there has to be two, forces here playing in synergy. One is the market, one is the ESO, and the other one is actually technology disruptors like AMPEX. They need to be able to price forecast. They need to be able to have their own means to see what happens ahead of time. So advanced data analytics, AI absolutely needs to be leveraged at the, from the service providers themselves, not just waiting for market price signals to come in. We need to capacity forecast ahead of time, especially if we want risk to be taken upon consumers. If we think of full transactivity, the retailer risk literally shifts on consumers, and for them to take the risk, we need to be able to give them ways to, come on board with dynamic tariffs, and in the future with demand response constructs where they're truly playing in real time, small settlement periods, all of that. So I think it's two ways. It's a two-way system. It's the ES on one side, market design reforms, and it's the technology providers with their AI infrastructure, that they need to play a role. But I think this is, to me, the most exciting topic at the moment that I have looked forward to hearing what my two peers, think about it.
Yeah, Kathy, did you want to come in then, follow up on Irene's point?
Locational pricing is always a dangerous one, isn't it? And I see quite a few questions on the list already. I think there's a really important point that when we talk about storage, lots of people think about batteries and pump storage and stuff. I've always thought of demand side response as a form of storage, because mostly consumers are shifting what they do to a different time, which is really a storage kind of approach. And it's how do we encourage that behavior, and it's very difficult. And I was on, I don't know if anyone else has been joining there's a lot of people looking at market reform at the minute, and we've got the issue in that a lot of winds wants to connect in Scotland because it's nice and windy up there, offshore, etc. But the constraint between England and Scotland is going to get terribly jammed until the new lines are built, and that's probably, figures I've seen that by 2027, 2028, it'll be constrained 70% of the time. So I think I was on the calls last week, and there was a lot of talk about let's go to locational marginal pricing, or let's go, and it depends what we're trying to do. If we're interested in the transmission system side of things, the big stuff first, And what we're trying to solve, the main thing we're trying to solve there is constraints in Scotland. Now you can try and put storage above the constraint, and I was looking at this, but if it's constrained 70% of the time, it's really hard to get a storage solution that does that well. And we're waiting for that to, those lines to be built, and in having the right signals to encourage the investment in the transmission network is really important, because if you look at all the decarbonisation scenarios, we're going to be putting a lot more terawatt hours through our system. Now, hopefully we can flatten that off, which is where the signals for demand come in big time. But for things like wind in Scotland, I'm not convinced by full nodal pricing across the transmission system, because actually there's just a big constraint that we have to sort out. Nodal pricing is overkill. Maybe you just go zonal. But then the whole distribution bit is really interesting, and I can understand why Irena gets really excited by it. But again, I'm struggling with locational marginal pricing with that in my head, and it might just be I just don't have a big enough brain. But what I struggle with is there's so many nodes. How do you, if you go down that route, you know, you're trying to solve the whole network with everyone's supply and demand to get the prices, and errors in the data could cause differences for consumers that could be quite high. So is that equitable and fair? So I think locational pricing is super important. And I really don't know what the answer is at the minute, but it's one of the things the industry has to be looking at. And it's locational and also time of use pricing that people can react to. And I totally agree. I work in the energy industry. I really don't want to have to engage with the energy in my house at all. I've got enough to do with my time. I want something to sort it out for me. And I want the techie people to come up with the stuff. So I get a good price for my electricity. I'm helping the environment, and I don't even have to think about it. So Irena, is that something you can do for me?
I've already, I've decided
You've already done it.
I've already decided you're going to be taking the MPEX behind the meter technology in your home and be one of our biggest champions for a fact.
Yeah. I live in a house that was built in the 1500s and is single glazed and only have on-street parking. So I'm going to be a big challenge for you.
You can be a bigger challenge than Graham Cooper. He sounds pretty much like you, in a very house, and perhaps a bit more techy in terms of what is going behind it. But yes, no, I think you're totally right. I think it's the LMP argument is very complex. I'm not saying that we've got market design already sorted out, but I do think that if we fast forward and we start seeing where do we want to land and work backwards from that, thinking of the market very localized, to me, localized market, virtual localized marketplaces are inevitably the place we're going to be landing on. So how do we work backwards from having that decentralized level of control that then needs to drive a bottom-up approach? I mean, there is no doubt that we are already, even unconsciously in some ways, but consciously most of the time, thinking bottom-up, because it's the distribution that is now pushing for the level of flex that we need to unlock due to what we've just been talking about.
And that's why I worry about locational marginal pricing, because it puts us back to centralized dispatch, day ahead, markets, all that kind of stuff. And I'm not sure that works with a really highly decentralized market. And I'm a big believer in markets. So I don't know what your view is on that.
So I think I agree with you. I don't think that thinking localized virtual marketplaces necessarily is thinking LMP that's, cascades all the way and percolates right down, because otherwise we go again a centrally commanded way to devise, settlements and to devise response all the way from bottom up. I think that we need to think of decentralization almost in an extreme fashion from where we are today. But if you think about where we are today from where we were 10 years ago, nobody would have ever said that we were here speaking about an individual consumer in a home doing exactly what you said before. You described demand side management as a form of storage, because it is. If you shift that level of consumption, you're acting almost as the battery that makes up for the constraint in generation. So I think we need to play with market design aggressively, thinking how can a localized marketplace then, reconcile itself with adjacent others, and how can grid from an actual power flow point of view, match with price signals, because when we speak of peer-to-peer trading and what the role of consumers can be, we can't just think of settlements and address that layer only of the discussion. The price signals, the role the unlocking flexibility can play has to absolutely be combined and be reflecting of what happens in the network at that point in time. And this is where Ampex has been lending efforts with smart infrastructure upgrade. We've got a smart transformer that is going live in a few weeks with one of the largest DNOs in the country. And that not only solve network constraints, which have to do with increased DER penetration, voltage excursions, but most importantly, be a way through data capture, a high frequency, to actually gain visibility on the network behavior. Because let's not forget, it's a circular issue. It's capacity forecast, which has to be optimized, because at the moment we're still acting in a very cautious manner, thinking over capacity, because we have to be conservative. Then it's what do we actually see happen ahead of time that can inform decisions about network reinforcements and leverage non-wire alternatives such as demand response. And then is how do a localized marketplace in 10, 20 years down the line actually is not just an expression of I have excess energy at this point in time, can I trade it? You can't if there is nowhere for that energy to go. So you need to know what happens on grid in real time for you to be able to then make that trading happen in response to grid constraints. So it's nowhere near easy, but I think it's the thinking that needs to really be future-proof in order to then land where we need to land, instead of just addressing challenges as they come year on year due to a pandemic, due to wind that is not blowing, etc., etc. Yeah,
I would hope that I think a lot of Hannah's colleagues are thinking about that, and Laura Sands is doing a great job of thinking some of that digital infrastructure that supports that over the longer term. But just to bring Hannah in, I thought it was interesting, Kathy and Irene, making this point about central control versus decentralized control. And I think locational pricing is a really interesting one, because we talk about where that signal comes from within markets and pricing, but actually that locational signal comes from lots of different places, business rates, prices of land. There's lots of different, and we've not even talked about network charging yet, which maybe we won't, but there's lots of different signals coming in there which affect location. So there's a question there for, I guess, for BEIS and for Ofgem and for the electricity system operator in particular, what's that balance between that central planning and control and letting market signals dictate that? Because there's a tension there, isn't there? Do you have a sense of that, Hannah, of where you think that balance could sit, or how we decide where that balance should sit?
Yeah, I think very big questions, and really interesting to kind of hear different views. I think these are all big questions that we can't look at in isolation, so we need to be working kind of across the whole energy system to answer these questions. And you're right, like on the locational point, do you get these signals through network charging, through development of local flexibility markets, or do you need kind of more fundamental shift to locational pricing or whatever? These all have huge implications, so I don't think we're in a position to kind of comment on which way at this point in time, but definitely something that lots of people are thinking about, and obviously Ofgem kind of thinking about from a network charging perspective. Obviously recently, I think this week, published an update on the access and kind of forward-looking charges review. I guess in terms of kind of our role, we have always taken a market-based approach when it comes to kind of smart systems and flexibility, and we think that's really, really important. We want to ensure that market framework encourages effective competition. It delivers an affordable, secure, reliable system, consistent with net zero, of course, as well. But that doesn't mean we won't intervene where there are market failures. And the other role that we see is very important for government as well is around kind of investing in innovation to help commercialize these new technologies and kind of bring them onto the system, create that level playing field so that the right solution can come forward for the problem that's at hand in a particular location or at a particular point within the year, whatever the specific problem is. So yeah, I think very big questions that are very kind of interrelated. Obviously, there's also lots of work going on to do with the future system operator.
Yeah, could you just, for the benefit of people on the call, could you just mention a little bit about that future system operator work? I know it's not your department, but would be interesting just to touch on that, I think.
Yeah, so yeah, not an expert, but I'm very happy to kind of give an overview. So the future system operator proposals at very early stages. We published a consultation on it last year and are due to kind of publish the response to that in due course. I guess at a very high level, the consultation set out proposals for an expert and impartial body with responsibilities across both the electricity and the gas systems in order to drive progress towards kind of net zero, whilst maintaining energy security, minimising costs for consumers, obviously absolutely crucial. And I think the proposals kind of set out that this body would take a stronger and more kind of more strategic role in network planning. And that's thinking about kind of both onshore and offshore electricity networks, the introduction of competition for network solutions as well, and also kind of a more active role in designing and planning what the future system looks like. So I guess just in terms of a couple of the kind of outcomes that, you know, we think that an FSO would have kind of a role to help us realise, it's things like optimised reductions in network and balancing costs, efficient technology decisions, so providing that kind of those engineering insights into government and Ofgem and industry. We're going to have to make a lot of big decisions about kind of the future energy system over the coming decades, so that kind of insight is absolutely crucial to making those decisions. Also a role for kind of coordinated system development, so understanding the impact of any decisions across the whole system as it becomes more integrated. And then finally, increased innovation as well, supporting kind of the development of standards, codes that remove barriers to new technologies.
Yeah, I think a really amazing set of proposals there. Really, that's lots of great things that the future system operator could be doing. I think it's probably an interesting one to touch on, maybe with the rest of the panel, just to see what people's thoughts are on that shift from the electricity system operator becoming the future system operator, and all the things that Hannah just mentioned that could mean. Kathy, is, you used to work at the ESO. How significant do you see that shift being, and where do you think what direction should it take?
I think it's very interesting. Not interesting enough to go back. I love trading, but one of the things I worry about is, so if people haven't met me before, I'm a big believer in markets and markets delivering solutions. And I think the energy system is so complex that I hate the idea of a central planner who decides all the technologies and it's going to be like this, and a bit like back to the CGB. And it's, how do you get there was two bits in there. There was the sort of more strategic planning along with innovation. And how do you get both of those things? Because I think a lot of the innovation comes from outside. I think there's quite a lot of innovation in there as well. So I believe strongly in the more competition, and so understanding what needs to happen on the network. And I think probably, in my view, some of the network investments being maybe a little later than it should have been. And if we can speed that up, if we can get to more anticipatory investment as well, because we know this stuff is needed to get to net zero. So why aren't we building some of the wires and stuff in advance? And how can we set up a regulatory regime that allows that? So I'm very interested in that kind of thing. Where I get more nervous of a sort of a strategic role is, and this was the other one of their market things, is how do you decide the technology mix? And it's how much is the government picking winners by how they set up any kind of CFDs or investment, and how much the market does it. And it's hard because some of the things that could come along, we never would have imagined would come along. And I don't think central planning is the best way to get innovation. but we need a degree of coordination to make things happen. And that's a real struggle for me. And I tend to be more down the market's route wherever possible, and allow the market to be really innovative in solutions. And I think the ESO has done that really well in the Pathfinders, where they've, instead of saying this is the technology they want, they say this is the need that we're trying to meet, come up with different ways of doing it, and we pay for the service that we've described rather than we define the technology. But can you do that with everything? I'm not certain, but that would be my preference.
Yeah, I think, I guess my well, some challenges back to that, I suppose, that come up is saying, well, yes, the ESO can be open and say we just need a technology to fulfill this, and that's open to any technology that wants to provide it. But unfortunately, just the way the system is set up, that tends towards fossil fuels at the moment, who have a distinct advantage in bidding for some of those contracts and being able to provide some of those services. So do you think we'll ever need to?
Definitely not the case on ancillaries on the Pathfinder, because they said you have to do it without putting any megawatts onto the system. So it doesn't go for the new technology, for fossil fuel technologies. I also, we've had this argument in the past. We're in a transition. I firmly don't believe in emissions limits on individual technologies, because it's the overall emissions on the system that matter, rather than each technology. So you can find, and I've got a very good example, where you have lots of renewables with standby peaking generating plants, produces lower emissions than lots of renewables with CCGTs, which have got lower emissions in their own right, but to provide the services have to displace renewables. So I agree that, we should be, but we can all see, like my company, would we invest in unabated gas anymore? We can see the direction of travel and getting to net zero. Why would we do that? And economics is a really good driver.
Yeah, well, I'd hope that, I think that's why people are on this call today, and that's why the ESN sort of exists in itself, to be that we're here because we want it to decarbonise. So yes, I think I agree that the industry recognises that shift is going to happen. I guess it's just where the system and the markets kind of pick that up and allow people to run with that, or whether we think we need some slightly more control. But I think we could debate that back and forth for quite a while.
The cost of carbon should be in the carbon price, and if we get a proper carbon price, that's what we need.
That would be, I think we should have another session on that, because I think that carbon, where the price of carbon comes in, is a really interesting one. Irina, sorry, you look like you were about to come in. I interrupted you.
On the last point, I can't agree more with Kathy. I think it's highly unrealistic, and also, frankly, doesn't really go with understanding the peculiarities of different technologies to try and impose a certain level of carbon limit, regardless of what technology we're talking about. That's not what the system needs. A system needs to have, a level of containment on that carbon, which needs to be addressed in synergy by different technologies. So it's our job to make sure that we compensate on the different contributions and respect the distinct aspects of each of the technologies, in their own right. So I agree with that, Kathy. I also say that from AMPEC's point of view, for everything that our vision and mission is about, we completely welcome unbundling the ESO from National Grid, because I think that, to have a level of centralized control on an increasingly decentralized system can only create blockages and confusion. I think that having a more agile FSO that also addresses these stances that network operators have been making about, we go with flexibility first, we try and leverage non-wire alternatives. We need to be mindful of overinvestment on regulated asset base in order to, even ahead of time, and an FSO can definitely address that. So unbundling to me is a positive move. But I think that the challenge that all three on this panel recognize is that marrying the physics of the grid with the economics. Kathy rightly says economics will drive, is the biggest driver. It's how we marry the constraints that we need to be aware of with the economics in the right place. So ultimately, is that market design that needs to do these two things. but the technology players need to absolutely be encouraged to be a part of the debate. We need to move away from just network operators or ESO design the markets and then us coming on to deliver solutions just in a reactive manner.
Yeah, no, completely. That sounds, definitely. We'll be debating that for the next few years, and hopefully, that FSO shape will be coming forward in the next year or so as we see BEIS responding to that consultation. If you're interested in what the ESN and Regen responded to that, there is our consultation responses on the Hoover platform if you wanted to have a look, just to see kind of where we think that the future system operator should go. Just in the last few minutes, I wanted to just jump a little bit to prices, because I think that's something we've not really touched on yet, about costs and balancing costs and things like that, and how storage takes advantage of those business models. I think, I'm not going to surprise anyone by saying we've seen massive price spikes in the last few months. Obviously, we won't go into some of the bigger shifts that means and the challenges that means for the energy industry more generally. But I guess for storage, taking advantage of those price spikes is really important for that business model. But it's got to the point where the price spikes are so high that Ofgem are actually saying, well, maybe we should come in and cap that, because we're worried about how high those balancing costs are. What do you think that might mean for the future business model for storage, and how it can stack those different revenues and take advantage of that arbitrage? And anyone feel free to come in, or I'll pick on someone, but thoughts welcome.
So I'm currently spending about 30% of my time explaining to my parent company in Singapore how we're going to make money out of batteries in the future. And the main thing I say is that I don't know. So the key thing when you're trading something like batteries, it's the optionality, and it's the optionality not just on the spread between high and low. It's the optionality to move between markets. So if you look at the underlying premise as to why we need more flex, it's because we've got more renewables on the system, and we can see the value will be in flex. And the key thing for me to be able to manage these batteries well is to be highly flexible in how you operate them, be totally analysing the whole time, be sure that you can be in all the markets, and that's how you're going to extract the most value. But if you ask me even which market is going to be most valuable next week, Kathy, or even tomorrow, half the time I'm going, well, tomorrow, I've looked at the margin, therefore I think, it's going to be this or that. But it's that flexibility is where people are going to extract the value. And that's where I think we have one of the advantages. We don't actually farm out the management of our batteries to a service provider like many people do. We own and operate them and optimize them in-house. But that's because I've got a 24/7 trading team, so I can do that.
Yeah, thanks, Kathy. I'm just looking at some of the questions that are coming in. Just to kind of follow on from that, someone's asked you what will be the impact of storage on the unit rate charged to consumers. I wonder if, I said we wouldn't get into the broader piece about prices, but maybe we should, because it is interesting. But what do we think those business models for storage and how we build those and how we make storage be able to survive and make money? What impact do we think that will have on costs? It's obviously very important at the moment for thinking about consumer costs and how they're rising. Does anyone have any thoughts on what impact storage would be, positive or negative? Hopefully positive.
I actually think that, going back to what we just said about the spike in pricing and how storage has been taking advantage of that, I first want to say that that's the role of storage. So we shouldn't actually be negatively surprised by or be driven to have to change market design or regulatory framework in order to cap on that revenue. That's exactly what storage is there to do, to charge when it's cost effective to do so, and to come in when the time is right. But we also need to think that as more of those events occur and there is storage capacity available, inevitably that will actually start making prices, peak prices, get lower, and that will inevitably benefit also consumers locally. So I think it's a virtuous rather than a vicious circle here. We just have to recognize the storage as being incrementally more coming in, harnessing revenue at specific events, that have coincided with high peak prices, but that's because they've been more seldom. as we start seeing storage playing more of a role, that dynamic containment becoming in the future, I think it's in a couple of months, dynamic regulation and moderation, there's going to be more of a role played by storage, and it's doing its job. It's providing us with optionality, as Kathy said, and the consumer will benefit from that ultimately.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and there's this whole argument that if we have more renewables, that will help us reduce the costs at the moment. Storage will absolutely be a part of that, reducing those costs.
Yes,
so,
right. So basically we have to manage a system to deliver. If the system is efficient, and storage is part of that efficient system, it's the cheapest way of managing the problem that it's trying to solve. And it's all just about supply demand in real time, and storage can be a very, very efficient way of doing that. And I saw a question about how is it not just how do we make sure it's not just supporting fossil fuels, was one of the questions on the list. And it's interesting because my company counts storage amongst its renewable portfolio, and at the minute it actually isn't really, because you're charging up with whatever is the marginal unit overnight, and that is typically gas right now. Sometimes it's not, we've been charging up on renewables, but as you get more and more renewables on the system, what the storage is really doing is absorbing that renewable energy when there isn't enough demand for it, and then releasing it when there is a requirement for energy and there's not enough renewables there. And it's that shifting as well. So as Irene said, it flattens prices out, because the more of it you build, the more that arbitrage opportunity between peak and off-peak will go. But it's also helping keep those renewables on the system as well, which is very, very valuable, so we don't have as much renewable shedding. So, and longer term storage will be really important for that as well.
Yeah. So Hannah, just to bring you in on that, I mean, we're talking there about quite a shift in prices and a shift in business models as renewables develop. How do you as BEIS, with the Smart Systems Plan, how do you look at managing some of that, maybe that price cannibalization that might come up as the price setter changes on the market? What do you see BEIS' role as, or what are you thinking about as kind of how we think about those future business models for storage and how they might shift?
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I guess our approach is to reform markets across the board. We're not there to kind of say exactly what storage should be doing in particular places. We need to create the markets and the policies that enable us to meet the carbon budgets, of course, but also solve all of the challenges, wholesale price signals, balancing, location constraints, operability. So it's managing all of those things, but then making sure that that is done at a fair and kind of reasonable cost to consumers. And that's absolutely critical. Everything going on at the moment, it really is at the forefront of minds is consumer costs.
Yeah.
And kind of facilitating competition to keep costs down. I guess to just reflect on some of the points that have been made as well, storage and flexibility does create system savings. That was shown through the analysis, like significant system savings by deploying flexibility. So we need to make sure that it is on the system, but then keeping that watchful eye to make sure that it is not breaching that boundary of unreasonable costs to consumers in particular situations.
Yeah, absolutely. And we'll definitely see that. This might lead into my next question, but we'll see that being one of the biggest challenges. I think that cost to consumers as we see those bills rising, unfortunately, in the next few months and potentially years. So I just wanted to give a bit of time for my last question, just to finish up before we go. So we talked about a number of different things over the course of this call, focusing on the role of the system operator in all of this, how we manage those costs of storage and how we manage the location of storage, etc. So lots of big challenges in there. I'm going to ask you all to pick one, or maybe two if you're lucky, of those as just a final comment. What do you think is going to have the biggest influence on the sector as we look forward to 2030, what over the next few years. Anyone who wants to come in first, if it's you all, the cogs turning, but if anyone's got anyone wants to come in first, it's just a final question.
Happy to jump in. So very hard to pick one. I've got two things that just to reflect on. I think the fact that we're going to see real changes in our generation mix over the next 10 years and really start to see, you know, I talked about how we're kind of at a tipping point with storage, it feels like, and I think that is just going to hopefully tip. And seeing the changes in that generation mix and really starting to understand what the system is going to look like and understanding which business models are going to fully establish themselves for storage. I think that's going to be really, really interesting to see and understand and shape kind of the 10 years following that. I think the other kind of thing that I wanted to mention was, you know, through the 2020s, we're going to have to start making more decisive steps about kind of which technologies are going to kind of roll out in the infrastructure for heat as well, and kind of understanding how that's going to impact demand in the power sector as well. And so I think that'll be really, really interesting for understanding where the further need for flexibility is as well.
Yeah, okay. You had more than one there, Hannah, but I'll let you off.
Sorry.
Irene or Kathy, did you want to come in on that? Irene.
Well, I think it's hard to pinpoint one since we've been talking about a number of them. But I think if I were to just say the greatest challenge I see is the policy, and we need a clear direction of travel when it comes to policy, which has to fully reflect the role of storage in the ESN and not be focused as it still is on generation and supply. I think that is absolutely the unlocker of a number of opportunities. And even when we speak of market design, there can't be a market design that is implementable unless there is a regulatory framework that allows for that market design and that set of changes to come in.
Yeah, and there's a lot going on that at the moment too. If people aren't on this call aren't aware, it's definitely tune into some of the market design work that is going on, because it is hugely influential for the next few years, and there's some quite big shifts happening at the moment. Kathy, what about you? Anything you can think of?
Right. So I, instead of thinking about what's the most important one, it's what's the one that's on my mind most at the minute as I'm finishing off the investment case. I actually think it's really hard for us to imagine in our heads what the system's going to actually be like with so much more renewables on it. And what does that mean for prices? What does that mean? And when I'm talking to my parent company in Singapore, they're trying to use all the standard supply demand models and that kind of thing to build up scenarios. And it's actually not about a central scenario anymore for things like flex. It's like Monday, when instead of the normal average of 6 gigawatts of wind on the system, we had less than a gig on the system and solar didn't turn up. It's about all that variability and it being very, very different from it is now. And when you have 30 gigawatts of wind on the system, for instance, and it's fairly correlated, how do you manage a system like that? And how do we get across that big change so that we get the investment when we need it? Because you can quickly, you know, I ran into initially, oh, well, can you do the supply demand curve, Kathy, and just show us that there's a need for batteries? Actually, no, and I've had to take them on this sort of storytelling journey and give example days. So that for me is just getting our heads around how different the system is going to be in the future, how different it is to manage, and therefore what you're going to need to be able to manage it. And that's really interesting and fascinating for me, but it's hard.
Yeah, it's very hard. I don't envy the people who are sat doing that modelling and having to think about that, as you all are. So yeah, it's definitely some great challenges there. I think it's good that we're all thinking about them. We're aware of what some of these challenges are, and we've got time to look ahead and prep. And I think the industry is in a really good position now to look ahead to that and to think about and really respond to those challenges with that huge pipeline we've got a really burgeoning industry, a really diverse set of people, technology. So I think all those challenges that you just mentioned, we're in a good position to solve them, hopefully, together. So thanks to all three of you for going on that journey with me today through to 2030. I think we've got some really good challenges to pick up on, and hopefully there's quite a few things there that we can be discussing over the next few sessions. You know, definitely things about long duration storage, that tension between transmission and distribution, that can see a lot of people in the questions and comments are talking about as well. We've got sessions coming up to dive into some of that in more detail. So yeah, I think that set us up really nicely for the next couple of days. So thank you to you all for that. These are exactly the kind of discussions that we do have within our memberships. These are the sorts of things that we're constantly debating in our working groups. And so yeah, if you want to be a part of that and you want to continue having these conversations with me, with Kathy, with Irena and Hannah, then please do have a look at our membership and join us if you want to, and see some of the people that we already have on board and involved. This is definitely, you know, I'm a policy wonk at heart. I love having these debates and discussions about what we're going to do in the future. And then we've got people like Kathy and Irene who are actually doing it, which is great. So please do join us for some of those discussions. We'll be circulating some of that info on that side after the session as well. So like I say, this is the first of 6 sessions over the next 2 days. So at 2 o'clock today, we're going to have my colleague Ollie Franklin, who's going to be discussing that dash for transmission with a couple of colleagues from Road Knight Taylor and Pivot Power. So really looking at the surge and transmission connections that we've had and what that might mean for the system. So it's a really interesting one coming up. And then at 4 o'clock, my colleague Ray Arnold is going to be chairing a session with National Grid ESO, Highview Power and Scottish Power Renewables to talk about long duration energy storage. We've touched on that quite a bit today, and I think some really, really interesting, but difficult issues to get into, but really fascinating as well. From one of the most fascinating parts of the energy sector, I think, is that diversity of technologies that we have, and long duration storage really does come out with those really exciting different types of storage that we use in compressed air, gravity storage, etc. So do tune into Ray's session for that. It should be interesting at 4 o'clock. And then we've got a whole load more sessions tomorrow, but I won't go into those at the moment. Hannah will be filling your inbox with all the information on that. So just click the links and join, and do just, you know, have a look at the discussions on our boards. You'll carry on these discussions in our community forums. It'd be great to hear your thoughts, and come to us as the ESN with those thoughts as well. We want to carry on those discussions within our working groups. Other thing I should say is if you're just stopping for lunch, maybe a little bit early, or when you do stop for lunch, we've got a podcast that we've recorded, me and my colleague Sophie Winnie, about the sustainability of the supply chain for batteries, in particular that battery life cycle, and looking at sustainability across that, which is another topic we touch on a lot within the electricity storage network. So if you're free over lunch or whenever you want to, we do have a podcast to listen to on that, and there will be another podcast tomorrow as well coming up. So plenty to do, plenty to listen to. Please do continue to tune in for the next 5 sessions, sorry. And thanks to Kathy, thanks to Hannah, and thanks to Irena for joining me today. Great to have a panel of leading women in the sector to kick off our electricity storage marketplace this year. So thanks to you all for coming, thanks for all your questions, and we'll see you at 2 o'clock.